I now call on the Minister for Employment, Productivity, Industrial Relations, Youth and Sports, the Honorable Parveen Bala. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honorable Cabinet Ministers, Honorable Leader of the Opposition, Honorable Members of Parliament, my fellow Fijians. It is my privilege to respond to the inaugural address made to this Parliament by His Excellency The President of Fiji to open the 2021-2022 session of Parliament. Mr. Speaker said, it is a pleasure to join my parliamentary colleagues and the people of Fiji to welcome His Excellency the President to his new position. At this point, Mr. Speaker said, allow me to thank the former President for his wise counsel and leadership for all Fijians. His tenure as President marked another highlight to his career as a servant of the people of Fiji, which he carried out with humility, grace, and charm. His message of peace, unity, and harmony were always at the forefront of his speeches and all forms of communication at all times. Mr. Speaker said, this tradition of wise counsel, humility, and grace in leading our nation was embedded in the words of His Excellency the President in his address to this Parliament and to the people of Fiji. In welcoming the wise words of Fiji's youngest President, it is important to remember that with his youth comes long years of leadership of his people as Tui Maduata. And his words showed wisdom beyond his years and provided a solid foundation for his coming tenure as the President of the Republic of the Fiji Islands, and is an inspiration for all Fijians, and in particular our youth, Mr. Speaker said. Mr. Speaker said, it stands to reason that His Excellency in his address has pointed out the need for truth and justice in our practice of democracy. Both, Mr. Speaker said, truth and justice are areas where the Fiji Affairs government has excelled in the past 8 years of delivering to the people of Fiji. Genuine democracy has only been achieved under the Fiji Affairs Party, Mr. Speaker said, and is genuine concern and care for all Fijians. Mr. Speaker said, we know only too well how democracy has been failed in past by insincere leaders who lack the genuine commitment and leadership now shown by the Honorable Prime Minister. As a leader committed to genuine democracy, our Honorable Prime Minister towers above these other leaders, some of whom are on the comeback trail. I'm not sure whether their comeback trail will lead to seeing that many of these sincere leaders. Mr. Speaker said, His Excellency the President, in his opening address, stated on youth and the youthful nature of the Fijian democracy. I commend his statement on the need for all Fijians to participate in upholding democracy and the Fijian Constitution. It is a timely reminder as we take stock of the past 2 years under COVID-19 and map our pathways out of it. Mr. Speaker said Fiji has demonstrated the strength of its democratic structures and processes in weathering the worst of the global pandemic. We are emerging out of it resilient, strong, and united. This will be, Mr. Speaker said, a key part of the recovery process. Resilience, strength, and unity among all Fijians. This is the strength, Mr. Speaker, of our nation. And as His Excellency mentioned in his address, his commitment to all the people of Fiji and their place as equal citizens under our Constitution. That is the big picture, Mr. Speaker, we must focus on. We cannot have people with little ideas and little minds focus on little issues of little relevance to the nation, pretending to be leaders be given the time of the day. They are the side shows of the day, Mr. Speaker, in this House, and we do not need. And they will remain side shows, Mr. Speaker, as we move forward towards a strong nation that is built on unity towards progress for all Fijians. Mr. Speaker, this key message from His Excellency the President was expressed clearly in the true spirit of an appeal in the national interest beyond the narrow vision of communal politics. Mr. Speaker, we welcome the wide appeal to all Fijians in the address by His Excellency the President across a number of issues. As I have stated earlier, the key to a prosperous Fiji is a united Fiji. And this means, Mr. Speaker, upholding key principles of governance. And Fijians have shown their unity in meeting our vaccination targets. Mr. Speaker, we fully endorse the statement by His Excellency the President on the vision and leadership under the Honorable Prime Minister and the Fiji Affairs Government in steering our way through the pandemic. More than ever before, Mr. Speaker, more than ever before in Fiji's history, this government has delivered the most in cash, grants, and in kind to enable Fijians to live through this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, this includes hundreds of millions in unemployment benefits as well as access to various funding options. This has never happened, Mr. Speaker, before in Fiji under any other government. Not in terms of scale of the money made available, Mr. Speaker, but also in terms of the length of time that this assistance has been sustained. And while economic recovery is forthcoming, Mr. Speaker, Fiji Affairs Government has committed to continuing assistance as we move back to the new normalcy. Mr. Speaker, at the same time, with our brave frontline workers in health and at our borders, we have managed to keep the worst of the pandemic from our shores. I commend the Honorable Prime Minister and our dedicated civil servants for their continued commitment to look at the ways and means to best weather the worst of the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the funding from the international agencies and our friendly bilateral donor nations is a vote of confidence in the leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister and the proven track record of good governance and sound economic policies of the Fiji Affairs Government. Goodwill, Mr. Speaker, is never given. It is earned, and the funding and continued assistance from the donor agencies and bilateral partner countries shows that Fiji under this government has earned its stripes as a sustainable and transparent democratic nation. And the payback from that is that Fijians have been provided for in various ways to cushion the impact of this pandemic. As I have said before, Mr. Speaker, this has been sustained during the past 2 years, and credit for this rightfully goes to the Fiji Affairs Government for its sound fiscal policies and good international standing. Mr. Speaker, given these measures, as outlined in the opening address by His Excellency, the President, we can look forward to the coming year as a year of great Fijian comeback story, a year to bounce back. And that will start with borders opening in few days, Mr. Speaker, to the international tourism. And Fiji will once again take its pride of place as the hub of the Pacific. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, commentators are busy making sense of COP26 and its impact on climate change. His Excellency the President, Mr. Speaker, has made a very moving statement on how climate change is affecting vulnerable communities on the ground. The Honorable Prime Minister has been front and center on the local, regional and global stage, in his great efforts to bring about real changes through forums like the COP forums. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to inform this Parliament that the Ministry of Youth and Sports has incorporated climate change awareness and mitigation programs into its core activities, and in particular in its work with youth groups. This includes an annual Youth Climate Summit Forum for an interchange of meaningful dialogue on the issues and climate-related programs such as Youth Coastal Care Club and disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation training programs. Mr. Speaker, I must commend the Honourable Prime Minister and Fiji's climate change initiative in its inclusion of our youth. Mr. Speaker, I must inform this Parliament that our youths are more aware of and proactive as a result of climate change as an issue due to this initiative. And we are looking forward to more action on the ground, Mr. Speaker, from our youths on climate change as we move forward in our ambitions towards the net zero target for Fiji and hopefully the world. Mr. Speaker, this is the real world and the real world of climate change that His Excellency the President so strongly spoke about in his speech. Regardless of humps and barriers to action on the global stage, we will carry on with our efforts on the ground to ensure the stewardship of all creation on our planet is justly and sustainability looked after. Mr. Speaker, the call by His Excellency the President for the responsible use and promotion of brand Fiji must be heeded by all in the road to economic recovery. We must enter this path to economic recovery by extending goodwill and encouraging fair and just dealings. Fiji will join many other countries, Mr. Speaker, in striving for a piece of the economic recovery cake. We must show respect for brand Fiji and welcome visitors and always value them for their contribution to our economy. That said, Mr. Speaker, we must also ensure equity and justice when it comes to employment and work practice from all parties, rather than short-term gains. We must all come together to rebuild brand Fiji into a resilient economy, one that can take hits like pandemic, yet still deliver livelihoods and jobs to all Fijians. On the job front, Mr. Speaker, at borders open, we look forward to an acceleration of opportunities under programs like the Pacific Mobility Scheme to further place suitable Fijians into rewarding international placements. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry for Employment, Industrial Relations and Productivity will work closely with stakeholders to ensure that we are placed at the front of the queue in these opportunities. At the same time, let me remind potential workers, Mr. Speaker, for these overseas job schemes, that all these opportunities will come with health protocol. This is a policy, Mr. Speaker, from both ends, from ours here in Fiji and labour market countries like Australia and New Zealand. Mr. Speaker, we also welcome the introduction of the bills outlined by His Excellency the President in his opening address. And there is more time for the opposition to go through, do research, and not to complain when it is tabled in this Parliament. So there is whole of 1 year for you to go through those bills and do some research and search. We welcome the bills that will protect and nurture our children and youth, and those that will provide fair practice in a variety of employment and professional fronts. Mr. Speaker, these bills are important to our functioning democracy, and we look forward to a useful and positive input from all into the debate on this. We may not all agree on everything, but these debates will provide a platform to discuss and be aware of the proposed changes. We look forward to constructive debate as we move Fiji forward through the reform agenda that drives these bills, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as His Excellency the President has outlined, it is quite likely that the next general election will be held within the period of this legislative session. As His Excellency the President has stated, that this will be Fiji's third free and fair election that provides equal representation to all citizens. This has become the foundation of Fiji's modern democracy, Mr. Speaker, sir, since the 2014. It is time that we show maturity and be responsible citizens first, rather than continue to lapse as political animals in our discussions and the visions we present to the people. It is important, Mr. Speaker, sir, we as leaders display this as a role model for our youth. Our youth are better educated than ever before, with greater access to information and the ability for critical thinking than before. We have been reassured of this in the many youth forums and interchanges within our ministry, but in the course of my interactions, it means that a large part of the population will not be misled easily, Mr. Speaker, sir. And they will respond to positive messages, and they will question critically the negative messages. Mr. Speaker, sir, elections provide the platform for people to tick off on their choices for the best of the best, to represent them. It is the platform that gives voice to their choices and why they choose some over others. We must respect, Mr. Speaker, sir, that when we speak to them, choice based on fear and favor, driven by appeals to the race card or other forms of division, ultimately will work against Fiji and all Fijians. Such appeals, Mr. Speaker, sir, unfortunately raise its ugly heads each time we have elections, and leads to the giving out of false and misleading information, and weakens our democratic foundation. We must abide by the clear message in His Excellency the President's address to fight hard, but fight fair. That we must, as he said, and I quote, "Those who seek office must approach the campaign with compassion, with dignity and understanding, and they must stay high by adhering to principles of ethical conduct rather than go low by seeking votes at any cost." I highly commend, Mr. Speaker, His Excellency the President for setting this high benchmark for all of us here in this Parliament and those outside aspiring for political office. Mr. Speaker, sir, elections determine the daily lives of ordinary citizens, and this knowledge is what drives to work as I and our government colleagues have been doing since 2014, and that is in the best interest of all Fijians. Politics is a call to duty and leadership. It must also be called for service and dedication to bettering the lives for all Fijians. And it is clear, Mr. Speaker, sir, the call for duty and leadership by service to the people through deeds, as we have been doing since 2014. And not mere words, as the opposition has been leaking only hot air, with no substance or style since 2014. Mr. Speaker, sir, on that note, I must commend the Honourable Prime Minister for his fair and firm leadership of government and of Fiji as a nation. A powerful figure who commands respect for bringing together and keeping together all Fijians. He has built a house on the government side that works together and strives together for a common purpose. And that purpose is the best of all things in a united Fiji for all Fijians. Since 2014, Mr. Speaker, we in government have seen a house of unity, a home of justice and fairness. Unlike the divided house of cards of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, where they don't know who holds the ace, or who is the next backstabber. Oh, may I add, who is that who have signed the so-called secret letter? Or who is the queen of queen? I don't want to add any more jokers and all those things. The message is very clear, but in their house of disunity, Mr. Speaker said. Mr. Speaker said this morning, Honorable Ulanaga mentioned about the Fiji pine. In fact, he should be the last person to talk about Fiji pine. And he knows why I'm saying this. Because during his term, as a board member, Fiji pine went to the losses of over 60 million. That's huge, Mr. Speaker, sir. That's huge.
Order.
Mr. Speaker,
Order.
sir,
Order.
it is after all more and more a house that spends more time in the courts, social media, and on all other platforms, fighting each other, than fighting for a cause or issue. One must ask, Mr. Speaker, say, with all this infighting, when will they have the time to serve or lead the people? No, sometimes I wonder. Honestly, sometimes I really wonder. And I feel sorry for you guys. Because I've been in politics for 30 years. And this is the worst opposition that I've ever seen. Please, fix your house. Mr. Speaker, I'm worried. No, I'm worried. I'm worried because of you. Because you're not telling who have signed that so-called secret letter.
Order.
Mr. Speaker, say.
Don't talk amongst yourselves across the floor.
Mr.
Address
Speaker,
the Speaker.
And the people of Fiji, they are a very good example. They are a very good example of a bad house. A house in a bad shape and with no foundation. It's no use saying "are." It's already there. What "are"? You better watch out.
Order.
A house in a bad shape. I will reiterate that. A house in a bad shape and with no foundations and structure to hold it together.
House divided.
You are talking too much, Honorable Member, but we, from this side of the house, we want to know who have signed that so-called secret letter. Please, reveal them. Mr. Speaker, say, we in government, the Fiji First government, have been the best example of the family that sticks together and works together in holding a house together to make the most progress. And we, Mr. Speaker, say, have served Fiji like no other government has, and we will serve Fiji like no other government can, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, say, I join my colleagues in welcoming His Excellency The President to this high office, and it has been my privilege to deliver this response in appreciation of His Excellency The President's inaugural opening address to this August House. Mr. Speaker, say, while Christmas is round the corner, and since this is the last Parliament sitting, may I take this opportunity to wish you and your family and the people of Fiji a Merry Christmas. Binakan, thank you.